I think with these films, we saw two different films, and they represent kind of a 15-year gap in filmmaking, where you were making work continuously through that. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just the techniques that have changed, or the way in which you've kind of changed.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I've always, before a thought had physicality, I was always trying to make animations, just a traditional way, and I was never getting very far with it. And then when computers came, suddenly it just happened that I was able to, with that new technology, really get into making animations, because when I started out as a painter, when I painted, I liked to layer things, and suddenly with computers I could start layering images on top of each other, and it became a more natural process for me to make things that way. And I had started out with this, the first one was done mainly on a paint program. It was called Matador at the time, and it was one of the first computer paint programs out there, and it was just so much fun. I just started painting and was working at Metrolight Studios, and of course I was doing commercial things and all that rot. And then I was just hanging out at night and just making my own things, because like, wow, you can do this, and wow, you can do this, and wow, you can do that. And that's basically where it's always been with me using the computer technology. It's like all this stuff that's available to us that we use commercially, we use in this kind of straight fashion, and you can produce such wonderful, beautiful things with it.
So, and these two pieces, and the handful of pieces of yours that I've seen, all have this kind of biological undertone. At least part of them draw from biological imagery, or maybe that's also just my interpretation of them. But is that something that you find present in most of your work, or is that just the slides that we're looking at?
I guess it is in a lot of my work. It is in a lot of my work, and I started out more figuratively as a painter, and then I got more and more abstract when I was painting. And I used to have a lot of people in my paintings, and then the people disappeared. And then actually when I started back into computer animation, they started appearing again, or references to people, or parts of people, or and then I actually, a lot of times I'll also combine live action. Those two pieces didn't have any live action in them, I'll combine live action. But that with computer animation, and those will have people and buildings and architecture and things all mixed together.
Any questions for?
We have questions. We can use a microphone so they can hear it.
Sorry.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
Any thoughts about these films in general?
No. The mic's not working, but I actually have some thoughts.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by your use of Painter, because I could tell by like the algorithms. I was like, she's a decent painter. And I was curious how long it took you to do that, because it looks like it was pretty early on.
It was the Matador piece, the first one, and I thought has no physicality. That was early on, and it also required a compositor too, as well, and I was using a compositor that was code-based, basically. You know, a compositor is code-based and mixing images together. And yeah, it did. It took a lot longer then than it would take now to do something like that. Right.
But it was nice to see like your aesthetic be influenced by the technology, but also you can still see that you have very strong artistic vision in both pieces, even though it's changed quite a bit.
Well, thank you.
And I'm curious, like, so that is my question. Do you sometimes feel that you have to, it's like being a painter, you change, or being an artist, you always change with your material, but how has the change in technology affected your internal process when you're developing your work?
I don't think it affected my internal process. It just opened up more possibilities of ways of putting images together, easier ways of putting images together, making all these beautiful things that would have been very difficult for me to make otherwise. Didn't really change my internal thinking so much as just opened up a world of possibilities that I could use.
The music on the second one was terrific.
That was Anton Haugen. And I wanted to say that, excuse me?
It's Haugen.
Haugen, I'm sorry. Anton, you want to come up here and talk about that? I didn't realize you were here.
Sorry. This is literally the second time we've met in person. the music that I did for that, it was, well, I've done soundtracks before for live action films. This was my first time doing an animation film. I met Audri through my brother, who works at the IOTA Center. What I did for that was, Audrey's just sent, we decided to collaborate. I didn't know anything, and she sent me the film in its, in like a rough draft kind of thing, when it was called Pom Poms instead of Dweeble. So I was interested by the swaying motion, so I tried to do like a waltz, but then like in the same way, there was also this, there's this emptiness in the, like all the bright colors that was presented, so it kind of felt oceanic, I guess, like, so in a way, like, so there's like kind of submarine kind of stuff going on there, but.
I think that the soundtrack, it makes a film. I mean, I've always thought if you can do something that works visually and then you add a good soundtrack to it, it doubles the effectiveness of the film, really. And I thought that the soundtrack was just added so much kind of irony and fun to it, and it really caught the spirit of everything.
As collaborators, what was your process? Because it can be kind of like interesting.
Emails.
Emails, you did it all online.
Right.
Wow. And so you'd send a file and then say, you know, I tweaked this, or.
Yeah.
Like I had this awful idea before. Like I put a lot of static originally in like my first, and then it was just sounded awful. But it was just like this. It was a lot easier. It was you had to be direct in like what you wanted in the process. So it was, and it was really interesting for me. Doing this, but,
Well, I just thought it was fun. I'd like to even do more of a collaboration, like even send something in a rougher state to him and have him like send something back and then change the visuals more. This one, the visuals are kind of set, but I did change them a couple of times along the way, and then he had to change the soundtrack back and forth. But it's nice when it's a back and forth process, because then I think you get both things can be better that
It's like
way.
a true collaboration.
Yeah, and like a film score, they usually like give them the whole film and then make music to it, right? And that's
And so this was sort of more organic.
more organic, right?
How long was that process?
I think we started in January or February.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really fast.
Yeah.
You guys are fast. Wow.
Very cool.
It's impressive.
Any other thoughts on the
I first saw Pat O'Gilkey's around 77. And I've always been a bit surprised that there hasn't been more work where people are pulling images together. And, but I think that now with the sort of availability of a lot of the computing resources and software, that people are finally sort of being able to just sit down by themselves, and if they have a vision, are able to start taking images, rearranging them, turning them into something else. And when Pat was doing that back in the 70s, you had to be insane to get access to the equipment. And it always struck me that now, the barrier to entry went down, particularly in the last 20 years or so. It's been a lot easier, getting easier all the time. But it never seemed to me that the amount of work that was coming out went up. You know, it was almost like at one point, the fact that it was so hard to attract a certain kind of crazy personality type. But I think it's real interesting to see some of this much more recent stuff, where people are, this ability to manipulate images and do animation is now starting to kind of bear fruition. I hadn't seen those. I saw Audri's piece last week. I hadn't seen those other two more recent pieces. It was really, those last week, because it was really great to see people kind of going down these kinds of paths again. Because I just thought it had died. I just thought it was going on.
That's interesting. I mean, it does raise a question that, and thank you so much for, you can have a seat here.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you guys.
But it does raise a